Okay, good morning. It's 10 o'clock here in London. Welcome to our webinar on the ERC Advanced Grant. We'll just wait a couple of more minutes to allow more participants to join, and we'll start very shortly. Okay, while numbers are stabilizing, let me remind you that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available afterwards on the dedicated YouTube channel of the UKRI on YouTube. Also, participants, you might have noticed that muted for the whole duration of the webinar. However, if you have any questions concerning the presentation, concerning the ERC Advanced Grant, please use the Q&A function at the top, which will be monitored by my colleagues, Roger and Raquel, who are working in the background. Please note that there are two chats. One is just called chat, and we will share on that tab just relevant links, resources, whereas for any question concerning the ERC Advanced Grant from your side, you should be using the Q&A tab instead. Right, we seem to have a healthy number of attendees, so welcome again, everyone, to our webinar on the ERC Advanced Grant delivered to you today by the UK National Counterpoint for the European Research Council. Just by way of introduction, my name is Antonino Puglisi, known as I often go by simply by Nino. I'm the UK National Counterpoint for the ERC in the UK. And as you can see from this cover slides, today I will be joined by Professor Adam Carter, who is already connected to this call, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Glasgow, who will be sharing with us later on during the presentation is a testimonial on getting an ERC grant. The webinar will last about 2 hours until 12 noon UK time. We will divide this time roughly in two parts. In the first part, I will whiz you through some basic information about everything ERC, but specifically the ERC Advanced Grants, starting with the eligibility criteria. I will then cover abundantly proposal development with a particular attention to the lump sum model that, as you might know, is a distinct characteristic of this funding opportunity with the ERC. Finally, we will briefly look at submission and evaluation process. We'll then take a short comfort break before giving the floor to Professor Carter, who, as I mentioned, will share his experience about getting an ERC Advanced Grant with some tips and suggestions. And hopefully we will have some time towards the end to answer live to your questions addressed to either me or Professor Carter. And just as a reminder again, for that question and answer session, please use the Q&A function, which is at the top of your screen. However, where we not be able to answer to all your questions live, you can always contact us at erc-uk@acro.ac.uk, and my colleague will be putting the functional email address in the chat as well for your information. Some housekeeping announcements now. As I said, and as people are already asking, everyone has been muted for the whole duration of the webinar, but recordings will be available afterwards on YouTube on the dedicated channel, UKRI channel. Also, the slides will be available afterwards in PDF version on the ACRO portal. Please do use the Q&A function. As I said, you can upvote your favorite question. So if you realize that someone has already asked something similar, so we can bundle up the most voted questions and ask them at the end to either me or Professor Adam Carter. So this webinar is being delivered to you by me as the national counterpoint for the ERC in the UK. And however, the NCP services are embedded within a wider family of NCP colleagues within UKRI, and in particular, the UKRI Horizon Europe engagement team is responsible for delivering NCP services, also for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. We have Raquel Meko-Melghizo, who is also the national counterpoint for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, supporting us in the background. Thank you, Raquel, for that. And I'd like to take a moment also to acknowledge my colleague Bourget, who is the national counterpoint for legal and financial. Thank you. And the head of the office, Nikki, who is also supporting us in the background. We also host a national counterpoint for Widera, COST, a new European Bauhaus. I just wanted to start by giving a little bit of background about this funding scheme, the ERC. For those who are not overly familiar with Horizon, this opportunity within Horizon Europe. In a nutshell, the European Research Council funds frontier research, offering long-term grants, mostly 5 years long, but in the case of Synergy, 6 years long, for scientists and scholars conducting pioneering research projects in any field of research. So in that respect, the ERC really funds science in the German, if you want, sense of the word of Wissenschaft, any kind of scientific endeavor or area of scholarship, if you want. The only criterion for such grants, and that would be a sort of a leitmotif throughout the presentation, is scientific excellence, no more, no less. So a segment of Horizon Europe very much driven by curiosity, by excellence. Since its inception in 2007, so we're coming up to 20 years, the ERC has funded over 13,000 top researchers from all over the world. Projects funded by the ERC have produced over 250,000 of scientific publications, several thousand patents, and several hundred startups emerged as a consequence of ERC-funded projects. Among its grantees, ERC counts now 12 Nobel Prize winners and several other recipients of highly prestigious international awards. That is to give you a sense of the incredibly popular and successive and attractive scheme, but also to give you the scale of the competition which is expected in the ERC. To achieve that mission, the European Research Council has a budget of about 16 billion euros for the framework program running from 2021 to 2027, representing 17% of the overall budget of Horizon Europe, with the ERC getting proportionally the most amount of money as of any other dimension of Horizon Europe. The funding scheme, we will see that in the eligibility section, is open to individuals from all over the world, regardless of nationality, age, and gender. But your host institution, and that's very clear to get straight from the beginning, must be based and established in one of the EU member states or countries which are associated to the framework program, to Horizon Europe. So crucially, the UK from the 1st of January 2024 is an eligible country, just in case people were not aware of that. However, you as the principal investigator and your team members, we will touch on team members in a moment, do not have to work full-time in Europe. There are conditions around that, which I will touch upon in a moment under the eligibility section again. Your research, once again, can cover any field of research, and there is no thematic restriction. There is no consortium required and no co-financing needed either from the national funding agency, in this case by the UK. Just convince the ERC of the scientific excellence of both yourself as a principal investigator and the scientific excellence of your pioneering research project. As you well know, the ERC family is composed of 5 main funding opportunities. Each one is calibrated upon the level of seniority of the applicants. In the ERC starting grants, we have 1.5 million available to support researchers at the more earlier stage of their career for people to become independent research leaders in Europe. We consolidate that grant is now up to 2 million, and that support researchers to establish themselves and the teams to continue to develop the successful career in Europe. Then we got the ERC grant, which is the largest so far of the mono beneficiary, if you want, of the independent researcher grant with 2.5 million that supports outstanding and already established research leaders to continue the work and expand the frontier of scientific knowledge. The Synergy grant is slightly different. It's the only truly collaborative opportunity with a grant of up to 10 million euros for up to 6 years. A team of up to 4 PIs work together in a synergistic manner to tackle a very ambitious and complex problem that could not be achieved by an individual researcher or the team working alone. Now, with the amendment to the 2026 work program, the ERC has launched a new scheme, which is called the ERC Plus grant, formerly known as Super Grant. That is now, terminology has been discontinued. The ERC Plus grant is part of a series of measures introduced by EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, together with Commissioner Zarajeva, in the context of the Choose Europe initiative. There are 2 rather comprehensive webinars that the ERC Executive Agency has recently produced that are hyperlinked in the slides, and feel free to watch them afterwards if you're interested in that funding opportunity. Also, for those of you who have just realized that the ERC Advanced is not for them and they are more in a more junior position, we will be holding a dedicated webinar to the ERC starting grants in only about 3 weeks on the 2nd of July 2026, and you can already register that as well for the webinar as well. So going back to the ERC Advanced Grant, its stated mission, as I mentioned, is to support outstanding and established research leaders to continue the work in expanding the frontier of scholarship of scientific knowledge in the specific area. It's a grant of up to 2.5 million. You must evidence a proven track record of significant research achievement in your specific area of scholarship. And technically, there is no need to evidence a PhD certificate as such, although for the majority of participants, of applicants, that is the case, they will have a PhD. Something to mention right at the beginning is that all the ERC options come with the possibility of a top-up money, also known as additional funding. We get a lot of questions as NCP about this. This is an extra pot of money to cover further eligible costs, and there are some changes that apply with the 2026 work program. And very briefly, as before, researchers already based working in the EU member state or associated country to Horizon Europe can apply for up to 1 million of such additional funding. Whereas, and this is, as I mentioned, new for the 2026 work program, researchers moving to Europe from outside the EU member state or associated country can now apply for double that amount, which is now up to 2 million in additional funding. There is no quota in terms of applications to additional funding between the people coming from within or outside Europe. So scientific excellence remains, once again, the only criterion of evaluation for both the base amount and the additional funding. Something else to note at this point is that with the 2026 work program, there is a significant change as to what kind of eligible costs applied to additional funding. Now, additional funding can be requested for any purpose, not only for a certain categories as you used to be in the past. And crucially, you can now apply for additional funding also to include personnel costs, which was not the case up until 2025 work program. Something to bear in mind when asking for additional funding is that, as for everything Horizon Europe, such costs must be duly justified. It would be particularly scrutinized by evaluators. It would be assessed. Their necessity would be assessed in the context of the overall project. It's therefore down to the PI's ability, capacity, if you want, to articulate to evaluators the need for such additional money. Going back to the specifics of the upcoming ERC Advanced Grant, this is the last funding opportunity for the 2026 work program alongside the ERC Plus, which has just been launched. And my colleague Nikki will now put in the chat the link to the 2026 work program, which is the legal framework for all the funding opportunities within the 2026 work program. But also very important, the information for applicants, something to keep on hand while you prepare your application to this funding opportunity. So this call opened on the 28th of May and will close on the 27th of August 2026, by which date by 5 p.m. Brussels time, you should have submitted all your best work. That is the full templates, part B1 and part B2, as I will explain in a moment. Something to note already that looking at the calendar from May to August, you don't really have a huge amount of time to put together your application. So to emphasize that the ERC does not lend itself to last-minute speculative application. You need to be strategic as to how to prepare your application, when to apply, due to the complexity and the level of competition that is expected for this upcoming call. Also, something to bear in mind, there is a number of resubmission restrictions, which I will explain towards the end, but essentially, if you score particularly low, you'll be stopped for a time from resubmission. So something to bear in mind from the beginning. So our advice as national counterpoint is to be strategic as to when to apply, particularly for the ERC Advanced, because you don't have really any restrictions in terms of your eligibility window. There is no time after the PhD that you should comply with. So just try to be as strategic as possible as to whether you are really ready to apply for the ERC. Then if you look at the third bubble in this slide, there are two dates there, January 27 and June 27. That's because the ERC has a system of a single submission. So everything goes through by deadline, the 27th of August. But then your proposal would be assessed in two-step evaluation process. Part B1 as step 1 and part B2 as step 2. And I will explain that again in more detail in a moment. If everything goes well, you are recommended for funding, and if sufficient fundings are available, you are expected to sign your grant agreement on the 16th of November 2027. That is to give you a sense also of the timeline. It's rather a long process that you need to go through overall. So as I already said, it's a single submission and two-step evaluation process for the 2026 work program, which is the call we're talking about today. There is an allocated budget of 747 million, which is expected to fund 294 projects. Now to the eligibility criteria. For the ERC is, in a way, it's rather simple. The ERC is open to principal investigators without any restrictions in terms of age, nationality, current location, current employment status. So people do not need to have a permanent position to apply for the ERC. What is really important is your groundbreaking idea, as we said, and that you must identify a host institution based in a EU member state or a country associated to the framework program Horizon Europe. So, of course, the UK is now eligible from the 1st of January 2024. However, there are demands in terms of your time commitment to both be based in the European program, in the European countries or associated countries to Horizon Europe. That is a 50% minimum of your time commitment to be based physically in the EU member state or associated country. But also there is another requirement in terms of your time commitment to the grant itself. That is 30% minimum of your overall working time. Now, please note that that is a percentage that is calculated as an average across the entire project duration. Regarding the host institution, that again, quite straightforward. It can be any type of legal entity registered in the UK. In the majority of cases would be universities, but it doesn't have to be only universities. It can be any legal entity, including business, public bodies, museums, for instance, NGOs. It just needs to be a legal entity registered in the UK. The host institution need to have the necessary infrastructures and capacity to allow the PI to independently carry out the research, and crucially, they must not constrain the PI to institutions, if you want, research strategies or priorities. If the PI at any stage, if you as a successful PI at any stage are not happy with the way the project is being implemented at your host institution, you got the right of portability. Essentially, you can transfer your grant to another eligible host institution. And interesting enough for the ERC, the host institution itself is not evaluated as such, is not assessed as such as part of the evaluation process. However, your host institution must sign a letter of commitment, which is submitted as part of your application in case, and then in case you are eligible, recommended for funding, they will sign the grant agreement on your behalf. Something very important for these types of grants is the presence of team members. You don't have to have team members necessarily, but in most cases, PIs will be supported by other individuals, by other researchers to implement the projects, to provide additional value, scientific added value to your project. However, what is really important for the ERC is that you as the PI remain the central piece, if you want, central to the project implementation. The PI should be seen at all time in the proposal and in the project implementation as the only person leading the project, the sole individual, if you want, sitting in the drive seat in the project implementation. What is really important is that team members can be based and remain based anywhere in the world. That's a very unique feature of the ERC. So unlike the principal investigator, team members have the freedom to remain based anywhere in the world. PIs have the freedom to choose such individuals, such team members. They can be at any level of seniority, but of course, as for everything Horizon Europe, you will need to justify and budget for the role and explain why you have chosen them and what they will be doing in the project. Just to preempt some of your questions, you can already name individuals if you have people in mind to best place to carry out the particular part of the project, but you don't have necessarily to name individuals. You can recruit them through a fair and transparent recruitment process afterwards. For team members, there are no restrictions, we have already said, in terms of geographical location, but also in terms of age, nationality. They can be based anywhere in the world, as said. Okay, let's turn now to the actual proposal development. The way you structure is basically revolving around three building blocks. We got a part A, which is the administrative part, which is completely online, and then a part B1, and then a part B2, which together comprise essentially your scientific proposal. The ERC gives template for for those two parts, for part B1 and for part B2, which I will show in a moment how to download. And finally, there is a transversal, if you want, part, which is the part where you can upload annexes. That, for instance, will include for the ERC Advanced Grant, the letter of support by your host institution. Let's focus for a moment on part A. Here is where you give information about yourself, your host institution, the ethics and security checks. Crucially, you give information about the budget, and I will focus on this quite a bit because the ERC Advanced Grant works on a lump sum model, which is something very unique in the ERC. Then you go part B1, which will be evaluated as step 1. So although part B1 and part B2, again, will be submitted both at a deadline, your part B1 will be evaluated as step 1. And that comprises an extended synopsis, now known as part 1, which is a 5-page long document, together with your CV and track record. If you think about it, it's not a lot of space. It's only 5 pages really to sell your ideas as step 1. And then if reviewers decide to take your proposal forward to step 2, that is a document which is 7 pages long. Now that is being changed with the 2026 work program. So be mindful of that change if you have already applied in the past. It's a much shorter document, used to be 14 pages long. So I will now in turn give more information about the different parts of the proposal. That is what your part A will look like when you go through the funding and then the portal in this admission space. And it's all online. It comprises information about your project. As I mentioned, the list of participants, that's point 2. Those are the team members I've already mentioned earlier on. Information about your budget, which I will describe in a moment. Then you will be asked to give information about your ethics and security and other questions as well. Unfortunately, I won't have the time to focus on every single part of it. I will focus specifically in this webinar on the lump sum, which is the most, let's say, the unique feature of the ERC Advanced Grant. So some basic principles around the lump sum. So in the lump sum 2, which is the lump sum model that applies to the ERC Advanced Grant, the amount is defined by you based on the proposal activities and resources needed, which are based on the estimated cost at your end as the principal investigator. Then the lump sum request is capped at a ceiling, however, which is in the case of the Advanced Grant 2.5 million plus 1 million if you ask additional funding if you're already based in the EU member state or associated country, or 2 million if you come from outside that area. That budget would be assessed during the evaluation with a focus on the justification of resources needed for the project implementation and the plausibility of such estimated costs that you plan to carry out. That means that once the lump sum is been approved and by the evaluation panel, the granting has been concluded, you sign the grant agreement, the actual real cost that you incur during the project are no longer relevant to the agency. The EU contribution would be paid on the basis of the completion of work, as is already described in your Part B2, but not necessarily on the scientific outcome of your project. The ERC understands that, particularly for ERC projects, there is a strong element of a risk of ambition that is implicit in the implementation of such projects. So it's only on the basis of the completion of the work, not on the successful scientific outcome as such. Last but not least, there won't be any financial reporting if working on the lump sum. So no submission of a cost claim, no timesheet request, and crucially, there is no need to submit a certificate on financial statement as for other ERC grants working on actual cost. What it means in practice, your project will be granted formally as one work package, although you're free to divide up your project implementation in several work packages yourself for your own sake. But in the eye of the ERC, your project will be granted formally as one work package for the entirety of the project implementation. This will allow you to secure a large pre-financing, which is effectively 80%, so that you have the full flexibility in achieving the project's objectives. So for an example of a project which is lasting 60 months, which is 5 years for the majority of applicants, that would be the case. You receive 80% in pre-financing to ensure cash flow. And during those 6 months, there would be no further payments. Now, something very important to emphasize, because there is there won't be any financial reporting for the entire project implementation. However, you'll be asked to produce a midterm scientific report halfway through, after 30 months, explaining your progress, explaining your challenges, and possibly if you have any deviations. At the end of the 6 months, you will be asked to produce another and final scientific report covering the full duration of the project. And if everything goes well, which will be in most cases, you will receive the remainder, the remaining 20% of your payments. And again, just to emphasize, when I say everything going well, the ERC means that all the essential tasks are being carried out, or equivalent tasks, but it doesn't really mean that you have to evidence at all times, a successful scientific outcome necessarily. This is also very important. It gives me the opportunity to emphasize that the importance of building a positive and constructive relationship with your project officer in Brussels in case you're recommended for funding, because that successful the completion of the essential tasks will be evaluated in close relationship with the project officer in Brussels. Some other things to consider. It's worth to emphasize that although the ERC Advanced Grant works on a different funding model, there is no change in the way your grant is being evaluated. Everything remains centered on the concept, on the idea of scientific excellence. So you, as the applicants, should not think any different in the way you conceive your project. You should remain as ambitious and not less risk-taking than before, or as for any other ERC option working on other funding model. Also, it's worth emphasizing that as PI and the lump sum, you still retain the right to portability, that is to transfer your grant to another host institution where you're not to be happy with your current setup at the host institution. So in essence, just to sum up, except for financial reporting, which is no longer needed, and the payment process, so large pre-financing, 80% upfront and 20% at the end, everything else essentially remains the same. Now, delving into more details about the lump sum, and I'm really sorry to give a lot of technical information about this, but it's really central for the ERC Advanced Grant. The two major changes in the way you build your application revolve around the way you conceive your budget, essentially, particularly around the personnel cost. Now, the personnel cost, the budget, will be based on a person month per staff category under the personnel cost section. You will also be given more space, and now up to 10,000 characters, to expand in your narrative budget as well, structured now in 6 boxes, and I will explain that in a moment. And thirdly, you will be asked to produce an equipment depreciation table. Now, this per se is nothing new. In Horizon Europe, everything works in terms of equipment already in a equipment depreciation approach. But what is new under the lump sum is that you have a compulsory table to upload in terms of equipment depreciation. And then I will touch very, very briefly on a declaration you need to be aware of, which is called Declaration 10. Now, about the personnel costs, as I mentioned, in essence, the applicants now asked to introduce person months in the way they budget for staff. And that applies for every single staff category for each beneficiary. So that applies to you as the principal investigator, but also for any other staff you envisage in your team. So essentially, you are asked to think in a slightly different way. So it's not about asking, forecasting how much you're gonna pay per month, but it's rather calculate in terms of how many person months you envisage for every staff category, how much you're willing to pay for the overall effort of that team member, and then the spreadsheet will automatically calculate the average monthly cost. And that you need to do that as highlighted in orange for every single staff category. To assist applicants in this new way of budgeting for personnel under lump sum, the ERC, and is hyperlinked at the bottom of that slide, has come up, has developed an ERC dashboard for personnel that you can use as a guideline. There is no expectation for you to fall 100%, but serves only as a guideline to estimate the personnel cost that you can use to build your budget and the personnel. As I mentioned, there is a narrative way that you also be asked to comply with when it comes to building your budget. In the budget narrative now, there are 6 boxes. There's something new under the 2026 work program to better articulate, explain, and justify your budget request. So in section A, B, C, and D, you reflect on the various sections of the budget, namely personnel, subcontracting, purchasing costs, and internal invoice goods and services. Whereas in the last 2 additional boxes, and that apply only if you ask, that is for section E, essentially for additional funding. And in the last box, if there are contributions, financial contributions from other sources as well. As mentioned, the overall space at your disposal now has been expanded to 10,000 characters, as opposed to 8,000 as it used to be in the past, but it needs to be now articulated in those 6 boxes now. As mentioned, the much dreaded equipment depreciation table. As mentioned, this is not new, it's a corporate feature of Horizon Europe, but you need to download the Excel table, and I will show you how to do that in a moment together with your Part B1 and B2, and also the template from your host institution letter. And you will need to calculate according to the institution or the host institution depreciation regulations, and then you need to upload that table as part of your application. Please note that if you don't have any equipment, you'll still be required to upload that Excel, even if it's empty. So there's something to bear in mind. That's the way it works. You need to re-upload as a compulsory document as part of your application, even if it's an empty table. So very briefly, you will be asked to tick a box which basically makes you aware that you need to comply with Declaration 10, which basically means you follow your in compliance with the usual accounting practice of the host institution, but also that you comply to the normal EU regulations about cost, as though you were under the normal actual cost that applies for the other ERC options. Right, I think that's a lot of information in terms of budget. Thank you for bearing with me, but that is very important that you understand the unique feature of the ERC Advanced Grant when it comes to budgeting. In part A, you will also be asked to comply with essentially to fill out an ethics and security questionnaire. Just a few pointers here. There is a guideline that my colleague will kindly put in the chat now. There is extensive information on how to complete your ethics and security self-assessment. Thank you, Nikki, for that. But a general piece of advice here, write as much as you need, but as shortly as you can possibly do. I know this sounds a bit cryptic, but just do not hide anything essentially to the executive agency about ethics and security. But if they need to ask you more information, they will come back to you asking for more info essentially. But you just need to, it's a tick boxes exercise in essence, and you need to give a little bit of information about what that ethics and security will impinge on. Right, going back now to B1 and B2, as mentioned, they will be assessed at different steps, namely B1 as step 1, and as step 2, it would be B2, again read together with your B1. B1 and B2 together will constitute your scientific proposal, where you describe the groundbreaking scientific idea and how you're going to implement your project. There are some changes in the format of these two parts, and that comes with the 2026 work program. So if you're not familiar with that, that's the time to pay more attention, as particularly how to build your part B2, which has now been shortened to 7 pages as opposed to 14, because there's a slight emphasis essentially on the emphasis that is being put on part 2. But going one step at a time, in part 1, evaluators will essentially look at the groundbreaking nature of your scientific idea and its alignment with the scientific excellence criterion that underpins everything ERC. In other words, the evaluators will be asking themselves, it is a great idea that is worth pursuing. So far, no major changes. The only thing perhaps to point out is that feasibility, evaluators are now starting feasibility is no longer a criterion of evaluation at this stage. The major changes now apply in the proposal structure of the second part 2, where the emphasis is now primarily on the implementation of the project. Applicants should focus on how the research idea can be pursued realistically, highlighting approach and methodology. So here is where the reviewers will ask themselves, can this idea be pursued realistically? And if so, in the manner and in the approach, with the approach that the applicant is proposing. So again, just to emphasize, the number of pages now requested for part 2 is being shortened to 7 pages. That's because the state of the art is no longer requested in part 2. And the logic behind is the 2 parts. The scientific committee of the Scientific Council of the ERC is now trying to make the 2 parts more complementary and to avoid repetition in between the 2 parts of the proposal. There is quite a comprehensive explanation by ERC President Maria Leptin, which we will put in the chat. Thank you, Nikki, for that, where she gives detailed information and the rationale behind such changes in light of the decision of the ERC Scientific Council. Okay, so a little bit more information about part 1. You should lay out the current state of knowledge, explain very clearly your scientific question, the objective of your project. And very important, although there is no emphasis on implementation in part one, you should, however, still give an overall approach, idea of the approach or research strategy you will go about to implement your project. The length of this part is, as before, 5 pages. You should convince the panel about that you are putting through an original and creative idea. Give a sense that you address an important question in your particular area of scholarship, and you should give a sense of how you will go about, in broad terms, about implementing it. It is important to understand that at step one, only your part one and your CV and track record will be assessed by evaluators. Therefore, it's important that you cover all the essential elements of your proposal in that short 5 pages of part one, together with 4 pages for CV and track record. When it comes to part two, instead, you should give a detailed explanation of your project implementation, including full details of your research methodology, the work plan, the risk assessment, any mitigating measures, and any further necessary background that you did not include in part one. Okay, here is the submission system, just to give you a sense of how to work with funding and tenders portal. So once you start your application and edit form there, close to the letter A in green, that's where you fill out all the necessary information of part A, which is the administrative part. Whereas on the left-hand side, you will see the arrow next to the letter B. That's where you download your templates for part B1, part B2, the letter for the host institution to support your application, and the infamous, if you want, depreciation, equipment depreciation table that you need to upload as compulsory document, even if it's empty, as I've mentioned. And then you fill them all out. You convert them into PDF, and you upload all the annexes in this part of the submission system. Okay, some more general consideration before we delve into the nuts and bolts of each part. Please observe any indication in the templates about page limits, formatting that are indicated in the templates. Reference do not count against page limits, so it's very important to remember that. And please keep on hand the information for applicants that Nikki has already put early on in the chat. Okay, so very briefly again, just to sum up. So your part B1, it will be essentially your business card. So it better look good. That is all that reviewers will see as step one of the evaluation. It comprises, as I mentioned, your part one, the 5 pages, your CV and track record, and the cover page which summarizes all the essential information already contained in part A. Something very important about CV and track records. There is no prescriptive format from the ERC. Just select your 10 most important achievements. And that by that, the ERC does not just mean your 10 most cited publications, but anything which is relevant to evidence that you're the best person to implement the project you promised to bring about. So anything to support your track record as the best person to implement your project. So please also give information about any career break, but be careful also, be mindful that the ERC does not follow just religiously any academic metric in terms of impact factor simply in that format. They want to see that you are recognized as a scholar, a leading scholar in your particular area of scholarship. So try to evidence, build a narrative around your CV track record, so to evidence you are the best person to implement that particular project. In B2 is where you get where the reviewers will be looking at your second part. Where if you pass a first stage, the emphasis is now on the implementation. Where they will be looking at part 2, which is the 7-page long document. And there will be also, you'll be also asked to fill out a funding ID. That is basically where you give information about any ongoing projects that you have at the moment, or any projects under evaluation at the moment. And that's not your opportunity to boast about your career, but essentially is to give the evaluators a sense of your time commitment. Basically, is to reassure the evaluators that you have the capacity to implement and to comply with the minimum time commitment that you promise in your part A. Okay, I'll now skip to the submission process very briefly. This is the panel, the classic panel structure. Traditionally, the ERC has 3 broad domains where evaluations are submitted: the physical science and engineering, the life sciences, and the social sciences and humanity. And every single domain has several different panels. So the choice of the different evaluation panel is fully your responsibility as the applicant. At the end of the day, you really are the best person to understand your project. So when you make your assess or discern about which panel to apply, please pay attention to the descriptors for each of those panels, which are described in the information for applicants, which has already been put in the chat. So you are in full responsibility. You have the full responsibility to pick a primary panel that reflects the best your proposal. You will also be asked to produce some keywords, and that will help essentially the panel chair to identify the right people to allocate as external evaluators. The ERC as step 2 as some external evaluators, which I will touch upon in a moment. Okay, these are sort of the steps that we recommend people take when they start an application for the ERC. First of all, create, if you haven't done that yet, an ECAS account so that you can initiate your application in the funding and tender portal. But soon after that, please do get in touch with your research support office at your host institution. That's very important, also because your host institution will be notified as soon as you start initiate on any Horizon Europe application. Then we also recommend to add contact details of other people who might be supporting you in the research supporting services. And then the other recommendation is to submit as early as possible and as often as possible. Essentially, every time you press the submit button, that works in all effects as a save as button. And then, as already mentioned several times, keep on hand the information for our applicant. That's a very important source of information for your application process. Okay, this is again what the submission service will look like. Nikki will now put the link to the call for proposal. A few things to notice here is that just make sure, first of all, I know it sounds a bit trivial, that you have initiated the proposal for the right call. So on the left-hand side, you will have your identifier, which is basically giving information about the call you're applying for. Then again, the edit form here, the second box is where you give information about your part A. Here is where you download your templates, your PDF, and re-upload them in the annexes here together with your letter of support. Then there is also a support and help desk space. That's to contact the Commission for any technical issue, but please bear in mind that it doesn't have anything to do with the content of your proposal. It's just about any technical difficulty you might come up against while using the funding and tenders portal. Now going to the evaluation process very briefly. The first thing to emphasize again is that the process is based on a single submission and two-step evaluation. First of all, I'd like to give you a sense of the workflow and the timeline. So after call deadline, your submission, your full proposal goes into two parallel streams, if you want, work streams. One is for eligibility and ethics checks, and the other one is for the actual scientific evaluation. And we will concentrate now only on the scientific evaluation as such. So at some point in November, the panel members, and that is the panel you have decided to pick, essentially will be composed of 28 peer reviewers, will evaluate your proposal. And again, is fully your responsibility when you choose in part A to choose the most relevant ERC panel for your evaluation. Just to reemphasize, that would be a panel that will look at your proposal in generalist terms, although they are all scholars in your area of scholarship, but they might not be super expert in your particular niche sort of area of research. The new work program for 2026, so the work program for this call emphasizes that there is no check on the feasibility as such as step one. So you should really emphasize they will look at whether you're really pushing the frontiers of knowledge as step one evaluation. So if your proposal is good enough, if you are convinced the evaluators that you really comply with the excellence criterion that is and groundbreaking nature, you will be taken to step two. And that is basically an evaluation in two steps in all effects. The panel members will now invite external reviewers. Those external reviewers are the little guys there with the star, and those individuals will be selected based on your keywords. And contextually, in of step two evaluation, you will be also asked to sit at an interview, which will be conducted online with your panel. Each panel decides on the exact format of the interview. So unfortunately, as National Court of Points, we can give only limited information on the number of slides allowed, for instance, or the format of the interview. So if you pass to step two, you will be informed as to what is expected of you as step two evaluation when it comes to the interview online. Now, if you pass step two and you get a second A, if sufficient fundings are available, you should typically sign your grant agreement within 6 months from the time you sign. You should start your project within 6 months from the moment you sign your grant agreement. Okay, that's again an explanation of things will be evaluated at the different steps. Step one is only your part B1, essentially your CV and track record, no emphasis on the feasibility as such, whereas a step two, they will look again as a B1 alongside your B2 and resources and detailed budget, which is being extracted from your part A, and that will constitute together your research proposal evaluation. What is the evaluation based on? The overarching idea is the excellence is the sole criterion of evaluation. I'm sure that is abundantly clear by now, but that is intended as both the excellence of you as the principal investigator and the excellence of your research idea. And that PISA tower there is just to emphasize that the ERC place slightly more importance, if you want, on the emphasis of the research project, therefore the groundbreaking nature, level of ambition of the project, rather than to the track record per se of the principal investigator. In terms of what the reviewers will be asking, what you should be asking yourself, that it can be seen again in two ways as the evaluation of your research project, and these are the questions you should be asking yourself as step one and step two. I'm not going through all the different questions. You will receive slides also for the sake of time now here. And also when it comes to the intellectual capacity and creativity or the PI, there's a set of questions that you might be asking yourself. those questions are also part of the information for applicants, so it's something that you can always reference to afterwards. Something that's really important really to understand at this point is that the evaluation outcome will have an impact on whether you are you will be stopped for a time to resubmission. Essentially, you need to score 2 A's in order to be recommended for funding. If you scored a B or a C at step 1, you essentially stop for a year in the case of B, or for a C in the step, or for 2 years in the case of C, and that applies to resubmission across Starting Consolidator, Advanced Grant itself, and ERC Plus. If you score a B at step 2, there are no resubmission restrictions, so you're welcome to resubmit again next year. Something very important already to highlight, that applicants to 2026 ERC Advance might not apply, will not be allowed to apply, are not eligible to apply to Synergy 2027. This is a new feature, something that will be implemented officially with the 2027 work program, but we've already been given early warning that ERC Advanced Grant 2026 will not be eligible to apply for Synergy Grant 2027. So be mindful that is a new feature of the ERC. Very briefly, other aspect to consider, use of artificial intelligence. DSC is quite open to the use of artificial intelligence for the actual applicant for the proposal writing, so long as the applicant takes full responsibility for what is being written. However, evaluators are not allowed to use artificial intelligence at any stage in the evaluation process. There are 2 recent statements which are hyperlinked at the end of this, at the bottom of this slide. So if you're interested in that, you can get more information. As for any Horizon Europe project, you are obliged to publish in open science sort of framework, and that is a legal obligation. There's more information hyperlinked in this as well. Recipients of ERC, as for any other Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, eligible to apply for free to publish under Open Research Europe, which is a platform devised created by the Commission itself. There are requirements of you in terms of gender as well that you need to comply with. So if you're interested in that, there is more information hyperlinked here. But crucially, your host institution will have to have a gender equality plan in place. If you didn't have one in place, they would be required to submit one before the signature of the grant agreement. And here is just a collection of all the links that Nikki has already very kindly put in the chat. The slides, again, will be available afterwards, so you can also revisit those links. And a particular emphasis I would like to put on DRC classes that are now available on YouTube with ample material on your proposal development. And with that, I'd like to finally just point towards the support we can offer as ERC National Contact Point. Once again, that is the functional email address. You can also subscribe to ERC newsletter through the QR code, and I would be behind that to support you in your administrative journey towards submission. With this, I think it's about time to take a little break. And if you remain connected, we'll continue at 11:10 for a testimonial by Professor Adam Carter on how to secure an ERC Advanced Grant. So thank you all for your attention. I see you in 8 minutes. Hi, Adam. I'll probably stop sharing so that you can put up your slides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's very clear. Thanks, Adam.
No problem.
Okay, so welcome back. And this is the best part of the webinar where you get the chance to hear from a successful ERC applicant. And today we are delighted to have with us Professor Adam Carter, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Glasgow. Adam, thank you very much for your time and for sharing with us your wisdom and your journey towards getting an ERC Advanced Grant. And congratulations! It's an incredibly competitive space to enter. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll take some time towards the end until midday to take some questions from the audience as well. So, Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Antonio. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with you about some things that have worked for me and some things that did not work for me. So I had a failed application before, and I learned some things along the way, and hopefully some of the things I learned might be useful to some of you. So a little bit about me. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Glasgow. I work in epistemology mostly, which is the philosophical theory of knowledge. I'm a co-director of a research center at the University of Glasgow, the Cogito Epistemology Research Center, and I work across several fields in philosophy. This includes mainly epistemology, but also the philosophy of action, and also increasingly lately, the philosophy of AI. And I'm the PI on an ERC Advanced Grant called the acronym Know-How, which I applied in the 2024 round, and I began the grant officially in October of last year, and it runs until 2030. I edit a philosophy journal, and I also published several books. A recent book prior to this project is on the philosophy of trust. And following the ERC grant, I was recently, earlier this year, elected a member of Academia Europaea. Here's what I'm going to cover in the talk today. I'm going to get a quick look at my ERC know-how grant. And by the way, I'm going to do this at a high level of altitude. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of the details. I'll just give you a little overview of what the project is about. And then I'm going to talk to you mostly about how the successful application came together, including an earlier one that did not come together very well, and some of the lessons that I learned, including some concrete strategy tips that I think made the difference, right? Between the two applications, the one that was successful and the one that wasn't. And also I'll talk a little bit about what it's meant for my career after getting this successful outcome, and why I think that it's worth the effort. Okay, the project ERC Know-How. So this is a project, again, it's principally located in philosophy, and one of the overarching questions I ask is what is the difference between merely being able to succeed at something and genuinely knowing how to do it? Often in philosophy and in epistemology in particular, we ask about knowledge of facts, but how does this relate to knowledge of how to do things? The Know-How project takes as a starting point that know-how is something that is important both in action, but also in thought. So both in our practical and theoretical lives, know-how is very important. Yet our theories in philosophy sort of treat these kind of differently and have different methodologies and different areas of philosophy that focus on know-how in connection with action as opposed to know-how in connection with good thinking. And what I do in the project is build one framework that spans both and can give us in a unified and principled way theories of knowledge how, intentional action, and control, both in acting and also in good thinking. So that is the shape of the proposal. It's timely. It's got one work package toward the end, which attempts to show how the framework can be applied from an account of human level intelligence to artificial intelligence. So in a sense, it bridges human and artificial intelligence, including dealing with the AI alignment problem, which is a timely problem in AI. It speaks to expertise, skill, and how we credit success in people and in machines. This is particularly timely, including how important it is to be able to identify experts. Being able to know who the experts are and who to trust is super important. What are the criteria in virtue of which we want to determine who counts as an expert and who doesn't? Know-how is an important criteria, and a theory that is able to transcend the divide between both human and artificial intelligence has ways of making progress on the question of how to identify experts in an age in which AI is increasingly has superhuman reliability. This project brings together three fields that I've worked in and had initial results in separately. So this is an epistemology, action, and AI. I have initial findings in all these areas. And so the project Know-How draws and builds upon these initial findings to do something much more ambitious than I tried before. And I've argued that I'm the right PI in the application for this because I have a track record of leading projects on all three of these things, but just never so far in a way that brings them all together. So I have prior results, and this project builds upon them. That's an attempt to give you a sort of a high-level description of the project without going into too many of the details. Now, the journey, right, for me, began back when I first worked on an ERC Advanced application back in 2020, and I did not know what I was doing. I did know that the project needed to be big and ambitious, but I don't think I made it big enough for one thing. So one thing I did not succeed in doing when I applied in 2020 is, so being based in the UK, right? One thing that's useful to do is to show why the application is something that is attempting to pull off something that you couldn't just easily subsume under a National Research Council. So why, it needs to be of a scope that is not just something that you'd ask for a 3-year AHRC or a UKRI style grant for. And I did not succeed in that way. I basically pitched a 3-year project and tried to squeeze it out into 5 years. Fortunately, in my case, it wasn't wasted work. I ended up getting a UKRI grant on the failed ERC project. And the fact that I spent the time working on the proposal was at least good for me because I had a bunch of material I could use for a smaller grant, but it was never pitched at the right level of ambition. In 2024, I did a completely different project. So the 2024 round, I pivoted entirely, licked my wounds from the rejection, reconceived how to best do this super strategically, and I developed a much stronger proposal and a stronger project. And my thinking behind the application was more strategic from the very get-go. And the project in 2024, when I applied, was funded. So obviously, there's an element of luck involved, and we all know this, right? It's the same kind of luck that you have when you send papers to journals. Sometimes reviewers are in a bad mood. There's no way to eliminate luck entirely. Even so, I think that the difference between the two applications, the one that failed and the one that succeeded, wasn't just all down to luck. I think that things that I changed strategically between the failed and the successful application, I think the best explanation is that they made a difference, and that the rest of this talk is going to be to go over some of the things I did differently from the time it didn't work to the time it did. So what made the difference? Well, and here's something, and I mentioned this to Antonio before. I need to put my cards on the table and point out that the application rules have changed since when I was successful to now. So in the 2024 round, the relationship between the B1 and the B2, as the ERC was conceiving it, was different in the sense that there was more overlap, as it were. So the B1 gave a sort of back then it gave kind of a short overview of what the project was going to be, and some other stuff, obviously the CV, etc. But then in the B2, you were meant to develop that in much more detail. Now, there are some similarities, and what I suggest you do is maybe see if you can extract maybe a lesson from what I took from how I approached in the failed case versus a successful case, the way I approached the B1 and the B2. Here's what was bad that I did in the time that I did not put forward a very strong application. I had an idea for the proposal, and I had a big picture, high altitude plan for how I was going to pull it off. I developed it in the B1, and I wrote that first. I'm like, oh, I don't want to write this B2. It's so long. I'll put that off, and that'll be the last thing that I do. That was a big mistake, because the way I framed things in the B1 was basically sort of gesturing to things that would need to be worked out in much more detail, right, in the B2. And then I left myself that task to develop it out in detail. And forcing out the detail later, right, I kept on finding soft spots when I was writing the B2. And I realized that things that I sort of suggested I would need to develop in more detail just didn't work, which then meant I'd have to go back to the B1 and sort of nitpick stuff around and fix that, then go back to the B2. And it was an absolute mess, and it took me a really long time. So in 2024, I did things very differently in a much more elegant way, in a way that saved me time, in a way that made the application of a higher quality. So the first thing I did was the hardest thing in 2024, which was what back then it was longer, I believe, in terms of pages as well, but also the methodology needed to be in a lot of detail in the B2 back in 2024. And I did all of that first. So I thought of everything painstakingly in detail, worked through all the details, did the hard thinking, did all that stuff first. And then I used that as the single reference point for everything else that would refer to the project, both in the online forms, the abstract and such, and also when I would describe the significance, etc., in the B1. All of that was sort of indexed to the fully worked out proposal in the B2. And that was so much more beneficial for me, because I wasn't worrying about, oh no, can I make this work? I rather just took my time, figured out the details, and a lot of careful thinking and planning, and then applied them to other parts of the form as needed. And that was a much easier task than forcing it from an outline to making sure you can get the details later. So that really, I mean, it might seem like a subtle point, but that made a huge difference for me. All right. So a second tip is to start early. It's easy to think that you can write a strong application maybe in a couple months, but I don't know. I think I started a long time in advance for the 2024 round, again, starting with the most substantive parts first, so that there's plenty of time to get a lot of feedback from a lot of people, and such that the version that you actually submit, right, you want this to be something that's gone through, it's been thoroughly vetted by a bunch of smart people in your field, a bunch of colleagues, people who can give you excellent feedback before you ever submit. So starting early is really strong. Also, bear in mind, right, the readership being different. This is something I did a little bit differently in 2024. I considered, who's going to be reading the B1 and who's going to be reading the B2. Obviously, the B2 is going to be judged by experts when it gets sent out to review, if indeed you make it past to the interview stage where it's going to be circulated to expert referees. And considering your audience for that, and also bearing in mind your audience for the B1, and that it's often judged right first by non-specialists in your area. And so they really need to be able to grasp the ambitiousness and the value. Something that your referees, right, for the B2 might be more inclined to give you a pass on because they're already invested in the area you're working on, whereas people that read the B1 might not, might need to be convinced a little bit more about the value and the significance of the project. So bearing the audience in mind, and also gathering feedback from a wide range of people, not just those in your area, especially on the B1. Right? Bearing in mind who's going to be looking at the B1, a very wide range of people giving you comments on the B1 and having them see the value of the project. The more people that can see the value of the project who aren't specialists, the better news, I think, for the B1. So that was something I did also the second time around. Okay. Super important. You can learn something by reading successful ERC advanced applications that have absolutely nothing to do with your area. I looked at various ERC proposals that were completely outside of my area, and I learned something from all of them. That being said, it's really, really, really important, I think, to find successful ERC applications in your field, in your area. And sort of the closer you can find successful ERC applications in your area, the more useful that's going to be to you, to seeing how they set it out. Because as Antonio pointed out, there isn't a prescriptive template that goes into detail beyond obviously the forms that you download from the website. There are things that need to be in there, and they make it very clear in the instructions. But as for how to frame it, it's multiply realizable how that can be done, and getting to see several different ways that successful ERC applications have chosen to go about framing things is very useful to the applicant, so you can maybe extract what things might be commonalities between some of the successful applications, including in your field. Also, bear in mind this. Conventions are going to differ by field, particularly when it comes to the methodology. So one mistake that you can make, and I think this is important, is, again, I'm based in philosophy. So there's a very specific way that successful funded grant applications in philosophy are going to typically look when it comes to explaining the methodology. And this is going to be different from the way it's going to be framed in empirical sciences. So it would be a mistake, I think, to see a successful ERC application that is from a completely different field and then try to, assume that the way that they've done the methodology is something that you can easily replicate in your field. Again, it's good to see successful applications in other fields, but for the purpose of thinking about methodology, the B2, again, the more successful applications you can get your hands on in your area, the better. Now, your research office at your university sometimes will have successful applications on file that they can share with you. And that is great. And it's a good idea to be proactive and just ask, do you have any on file that I can look at? And also, if you have friends and colleagues who have been successful, might as well ask them. Maybe they'll share it, maybe they won't. But the more you can look at and think about what is common to successful ones, I think the better. So I looked at quite a few, thinking about what was shared and common between the successful ones, my second round, and I found that really helpful. Okay, so here's another thing that I thought a lot about the round that it was successful, which was how to thread the needle on a certain kind of puzzle. And you'll see how the puzzle works immediately. And this is, in my opinion, one of the hardest aspects of conceiving and pitching a successful ERC, which is to thread the following needle, right? So the project needs to be hugely ambitious. It needs to be something that it's not the case that a smaller grant is going to fund it. So it needs to be a really big project. It's got to change the field, etc. But you also need to be able to be persuasive that you're the right person to deliver that project. So in light of those two desiderata, right, it needs to be ambitious and you need to give evidence that you're the right person to deliver it. Here is the trap. The trap is that the ultimate proof that you're the right person for this project would be to show that you've already darn near done the project, right? By pointing to a bunch of results that are really, really similar. You know, hypothetically speaking, if you could show that, then of course you're the right person because you've done so many similar things. As soon as you lean too far in that direction, though, you open yourself to the charge of, well, this is just incremental, right? This is just an incremental project that is not sufficiently ambitious because it is just a reheating or just minor improvements or developments on your existing work. So then you open yourself up to a seriously bad charge you don't want, which is the incremental charge, because the ERC doesn't want to fund stuff that's merely incremental. So if you try really hard to demonstrate, right, that you're the right person for the project, you run the risk of opening yourself up to the charge of incrementality. So, of course, and here's how it's a trap. The best way to not be, not succumb to the charge of incrementality is to do something entirely new, completely new. But of course, as soon as you go for that, now we're opening up a different risk, which is, well, why are you the right person for this project, given that you don't have any results in this area? You know, why you're doing something completely different. So it's like the more you try to meet one, it looks like you put yourself at risk of not meeting the other. So this is seriously hard. Here's how I've tried to thread it, which is this. This is at least how I did it. And I'm not suggesting that this is the only way to do it, but this is how I tried to work out of that puzzle and meeting those two desiderata. I tried to show, look, I've got some initial findings across several areas, and I argued that this ambitious project is what's needed for the first time to bring them together and to integrate and go beyond these initial findings in a transformative way. So the why me is explained by the fact that, well, I am the one that has got initial findings across these areas that I'm integrating for the first time for this very ambitious thing that is not merely incremental, but goes beyond what I've done before. So that is the way, that is a broad structure for how to, I think, meet both of those really important desiderata at once without meeting one at the expense of putting yourself at risk of not meeting the other. And by the two desiderata, again, I mean ambitiousness and you're the right person for the project. Okay, so it's tempting to think, and this is a point at the stage of project development. This is also something I did a little bit differently the second time around. It's tempting to think, okay, the ERC wants something ambitious, something bold, and something new. I need to do something that no one has ever done before. I mean, that's absolutely right. But the problem, I think, is, to confuse necessity with sufficiency on that one. So you need to do something that's novel, but there are plenty of untouched questions, right, that would be entirely novel. You'd be the first person to ever do them, but you might still be short when it comes to explaining their scientific value. So not everything that's novel has sufficient scientific value, right? So you want to aim for something, I think, that's all at once genuinely novel and so not incremental, timely and potentially transformative, and with impact beyond your narrow area, with the idea of trying to transform the state of the art rather than just add to it. So I mention this because although novelty is super important, I think one of the things that I really tried to keep in mind when doing the 2024 application that worked is to identify the novelty of the project within the context of its ability to transform the state of the art, as opposed to just as I did in the 2020 rubbish application where I said, well, look, the project's novel, without in a way that was kind of divorced in terms of the motivational narrative from the transformative impact that the proposal would have. Okay, a comment about the interview. So if you reach the interview stage, I mean, obviously you want to practice this a lot. In my case, and my understanding is that the interview times shift across disciplines. I'm not sure if that's right. Antonio will know better than me. I remember mine was 3 minutes is what I had in 2024 to deliver the interview. So it was short and sweet, but you have plenty of time to practice and make sure that you come in under the time limit. Many of the questions you'll get in the interview, right, they're gonna echo some of the expert reports on the B2. In my personal case, I had 14 reports, ultimately, is what I ended up finding out that I had on the B2. So they're very thorough. They get a lot of different experts to provide feedback on the B2, and those reports can then feed into the comments that you're going to get, the panel. Now here's what I did that, now again, I didn't get to the interview stage in the 2020 round, so I didn't have any experience for the interview for this before. My first interview was 2024, and I tried to be guided by an old lesson in the philosophy of science from Karl Popper, which is to test your theory, test yourself under the harshest conditions, not under kind conditions. So fortunately, I have some friends in philosophy who are prepared to ask me really hard questions, and I told them, don't hold back. Really put me through the grinder and ask me questions that are unfair, questions that are tricky, questions that are really smart, also some ones that are bad. And I tried to know my proposal inside and out in the way where I wasn't thrown, even by weird questions. Now, of course, you're going to have an excellent panel, most likely, an excellent reviewer. So many of your questions will be actually excellent, which in fact, many of mine were on the panel. But of course, you're going to get some ones that are not what you would expect, that are maybe representative of the particular demographics of the panel or an idiosyncratic interest of one of the people that was evaluating the B2. So I just say be prepared for as many questions as you can, including left field questions, and have a friend or colleague ask you questions that are outside the box and just watch how you can handle it. And I practiced that a lot, and that ended up coming in handy because it turns out that I ended up anticipating quite a few of the questions that I was asked. And so I was prepared for it. But that was partly because I tried to prepare for the weird questions as in addition to the ones that I expected. And again, I think one of the best ways that you can be disposed to answer well a really wide range of questions is to know the project inside out. That gives you the kind of ammunition to be able to respond to all kinds of questions. Okay, what has it meant to me? So one thing that I think it's been absolutely great. So I know that the ERC allows different percentages on advanced grants as with other grants. In my case, I'm 90%. And that means that I am able to dedicate my time and my mental energy and focus to trying to just focus on excellence with this project. And come on, right? With teaching and admin, your mind can be scattered across a bunch of stuff at once in a way that makes it really difficult to pull off a really big, ambitious project, as I'm sure you will all know when trying to focus on doing serious research, when you're answering a million student emails and a bunch of admin tasks and a bunch of meetings. The time and autonomy that the ERC can give you to pull off the project is excellent. And it's really refreshing to be in a position where, each day I have one serious thing that I can continue to focus and really zero in on and take my time with and try to just focus on excellence. So the time that you have, the staff time that you have as the PI is a serious incentive for these ERCs. It's also great that you'll have the funding, right, to build a team and lead the team. So you get to conceive a project, a really big project, but you get with the ERC the funding and the resources to really pull it off, including hiring people who are going to be excellent, who are going to help supplement your team, help you deliver whatever the really ambitious thing is that you said you're going to do. So you've got all of this. Also, a thing that I absolutely love about the ERC, particularly as they've moved to the, well, I think that this is, with the new lump sum model for ERC Advanced Grants, they put a lot of trust and flexibility in the PIs. So the ERC is backing the PI for ERC Advanced Grants in the sense that they let the project evolve as the science evolves, and it will, right, over 5 years. And so it might be that certain elements of the proposal, you realize as the science changes, you need to do something else. The ERC is trusting you to make a lot of these decisions without a bunch of oversight, so long as you're delivering the results. So you have a kind of autonomy and flexibility with the ERC that you don't always have with all funders, and it puts you in a position to really deliver something excellent. Also, obviously, this is super competitive, and you're going to spend a lot of time and investment, and you might not get the grant, as was the case for me in 2020. One thing that's really nice and serious to consider is that the level of effort that goes into developing an ERC isn't just put to waste if you don't get it, which is evidenced by the fact that you're going to have all this excellent, really well thought out material, right? Even if you end up not getting to the interview stage, you're going to have really laid stuff out in detail. That's just mandatory for even making a valid submission, right, to the ERC. And this is material that you could submit to a different grant. If you get past the funding threshold, right, you might be in a position to resubmit a version of this project later to the ERC. You might also take some stuff that you did for some work package development and work on this and send this to as a journal article. The fact being, you're going to have a lot of material that's going to be of a very high quality, and it's going to be reusable to different purposes. So putting through the effort that you're going to for the ERC allows you to have something in your shelf that could be used for various valuable things, including other grant applications. It's also a portable grant, which is great. Obviously, the grant travels with you, depending on your position with respect to the home university that you applied at. Obviously, you might be excited to continue to stay there and build a team, but it is a portable, and it puts you it gives you sort of a strong hand if you're considering heading somewhere else. The grant comes with you, which is also an important thing when it comes to the autonomy that the ERC is giving you with the grant. Also, I'm serious on this. I think it can help make you a better researcher to really, really work hard to put together a good ERC application, because you're thinking through elements of the methodology of risk mitigation, things like this. You're thinking about this in a level of detail that means that when you're actually ready to do the work, you've really thought through it by the time you've put through a good application. So these are all benefits, right? Even if you don't get the ERC, why it's worth the effort of having a crack at it. You're going to have this excellent material, such that if you get the grant, all these good things are going to happen. But even if you don't, various good things are still going to happen. So, all right, a final word. I remember this very clearly. After the interview, yeah, come on, who's kidding? It's going to be an agonizing wait until you find out. Nothing you can do about that, other than try not to overthink it. When my own result came, oh my gosh, I remember this. So it was one of those, I'm like, I don't go to the gym as much as I should, but I went there and I'm sitting there, and then we have terrible, terrible internet reception in my gym down in a basement. And I see an email that says, you have a notification from the European Commission. Like, oh. And I just started panicking and clicking the button, and I ended up running outside in the street, clicking. Took me a bunch of clicks. Finally, after about 10 minutes of clicking around, I got a signal, and only then did it sink in. And it really changes things. So it completely changed my situation for me. 5 years, a team, focused time on exactly the big, ambitious thing that you want to pursue. Obviously, again, these grants are super competitive, and a knockback early on is just part of the picture for many of us. But I think at the end of the day, it really is very much worth the effort. I thank you. And I also want to mention briefly, as I mentioned to Antonio, if you are successful in getting the grant, there is a Association of ERC Grantees, which is very valuable to be a part of. This is an independent grantee-led body that's founded by ERC grant holders. It's open to current and former ERC grant holders. The mission is to highlight and accelerate and defend fundamental bottom-up research, excellence-driven research in Europe, and it also offers a community and opportunities for public engagement and networking with other ERC recipients. So I would recommend, if you are able to get it, to consider joining the Association of ERC Grantees. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and that's it for me. Thank you.
I know that was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience, your knowledge, your wisdom, but above all, your enthusiasm. You're such a great advocate to the ERC, and we're very lucky to have heard from your lived experience today. There are several things which really stand out for me. I mean, your emphasis on time and preparation that is required, but also, hitting the sweet point between solidity of the ideas and early results, but also being risk-taking enough, to fall into the the evaluation criteria of excellence and the groundbreaking nature of research. And I'm sure that is really the difficult bit I find in the ERC, really to advise people how to navigate that space between having some early results sometimes and doing something which is not just incremental. So we have a little bit of time now, 15 minutes about, to take some questions from the floor. So I'm going to give it to Raquel or Roger.
Yeah. Thank you very much, both. We have, I would say, maybe 4 categories of questions, but I think that given that we have Adam over here, maybe we can start with the questions for him.
Yeah.
Because then everyone else can probably just contact the NCP help desk and then get the answers from there. So Adam, do you have any advice on how to frame the need for more interdisciplinary team, for example, political scientists, to tackle empirically a research question in philosophy? Quite a specific question, I would say.
So thanks. So I've been a part of quite a few different interdisciplinary grants as a philosopher, and I think it largely depends. Strategy largely depends on the very specific funding call, right? So some grants, right, are meant to be such that they are thoroughly interdisciplinary through and through, in which case you might have multiple PIs, right, co-PIs, depending on the funding call. Some grants want that, and in such a case, this takes a little bit more time and a little bit more development to make sure that you're using the terms the same way this is something we find in philosophy all the time. The way that we use certain concepts and terms is different from the way that they use it in other disciplines, and make sure that your collaborators and you are speaking a common language. That can take a little bit of time, so that's tricky. The other experience I have, though, is leading philosophy-led grants that have an interdisciplinary team, and I have some ideas for how I do this, at least in philosophy. One thing I don't have is much advice that goes beyond how one would do this methodologically speaking outside of philosophy. But I think that a narrative that's common that I've used in every single interdisciplinary grant that I've done is to point out that for some question X, right, it's a hard, big question, and to solve it, you require the input from various different fields, right? I'm saying this at a high level of abstraction. However, as we know, the key scientific results from many of these different fields are, as it were, siloed in those fields. And so, unfortunately, when people aren't talking to each other across these fields, that is a limitation to actually solving whatever problem X is. So a narrative for a grant is that you can point out the need for collaboration between different areas and then show that this particular grant, right, is going to solve this problem by bringing together exactly the fields that are needed. That's a super high level way to explain it, but I think looking at the very specific funding call and thinking about how to argue that your team is the best one to meet that need is probably the best way through. Feel free, my email address is on there. If you have any more specific questions about that with particular funders, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And then maybe before I hand over to Raquel with for some other questions, there's a very good question about how did you find striking a balance between presenting a project that is innovative, novel, and original, while also demonstrating relevant prior knowledge, expertise, and experience? So that I think will be very relevant for the ERC grantees or people interested in the advanced grants. So how did you find striking
So that was
balance
the
in your
hardest part.
application?
That was the hardest part. So that was where I definitely failed in my 2020 application. So in my 2020 application, I kind of made an argument sort of like this. Ooh, look, I've got some results in this very specific area of philosophy, and I'm going to improve them. I'm going to do something new, working within this very structured space. And one thing that it didn't do was convince, I think, the reader that if I pull the project off, that it's going to have impact that goes beyond that very narrow area. So thinking of things that way, at the very, very beginning stage, I tried to work on packaging and framing a project that is such that if it succeeds, so I was trying to think 5 years in the future, right? If I do everything that the project would do, what would be an example of some projects in this space that would actually change and impact not just my area, but various other fields, and thinking about how that would work. Thinking about that at the very time of specifying how to frame the ambition of the project, that was something I did in the 2024 round. And yeah, and I argued, this know-how project, I showed how it has implications that go beyond epistemology, but also to philosophy of cognitive science, to education, to law. So I sort of made these, the impact of the project really clear and had it in mind from the beginning. And then I tried to thread the needle that I described in the talk by showing that I have some publications that are in some areas that speak to various angles of this project and different aspects of it that are in different subfields of philosophy, but it really takes a long, sustained project to integrate them toward this large project that's going to have impact across areas for the first time. So I tried to do it that way. And I tried to think bigger, I guess, in some, from the very beginning in the 2024 round. And again, the why me bit was covered by the fact that I had initial results. I never tried to do this, by the way, which I think is a high risk. I don't think you want to, claim to be able to pull off something if you don't have a track record of at least some serious publications in that area. Obviously, you can try to mitigate that risk by saying, well, I'm going to bring in a postdoc that's going to do some such and such in that area that I'm not an expert at. But the very core part of the project, I think, should be something that you can show that you've got some initial results in, at least in my case, in that area, rather than outsourcing that bit to the postdoc. Again, I say this with a big caveat. I'm saying this in a way that perhaps extrapolates to other disciplines, but at least for philosophy, that's how I was thinking about it.
Yeah, but it's a very important clarification, Adam, because some people might think that in order to be successful in the ERC, you need early results, which is not necessarily an expectation of the evaluators. But yes, that interpreting that sense of showing a strong track record, yes. I mean, they won't trust anyone with 2.5 million if you don't have anything to support that you're the best person to implement a risky, groundbreaking idea. So you need to reassure evaluators that you're a good person to do that. Raquel, is anything from your side?
Thank you very much both for wonderful presentations. And there are some questions about the additional funding. There are several questions, Nino. I don't know, Adam, if your project included additional funding and you want to complement Nino's answer. But in terms of additional cost, how do they know, or how applicants know, is additional cost rather than normal cost? is there a different evaluation criteria for the additional cost? And also whether you can explain or expand on the additional 1 million for EU-based applicants rather than the other ones.
Yeah. So in fairness, it's not an easy question to answer. We get that a lot. There are no additional evaluation criteria for additional funding. You just need to persuade reviewers that you need an additional pot of money to implement your proposal. Of course, the ERC, like any evaluators, would hate someone try to artificially inflate the request for additional money. So you really need to consider the fact that they will be evaluated under the excellence criterion, but they will be particularly scrutinized in light of the overall project, that you need to really justify that you need that additional money to implement your project. Having said that, the major change that comes with the 2026 program, which is substantial, is that that additional costs are not restricted to any particular category. It used to be the case that you claimed additional funding for access to large facilities, field work, and other of the sorts. Now it can be applied to any cost category, crucially including personnel costs. So you can budget for additional postdocs, additional team members. That is totally acceptable. And additional, the write-off, let's say, or the not acceptance of the additional funding will not jeopardize the base amount in the case of successful evaluation as well. So that's something to bear in mind. You need to be daring, but do ask additional money if you really need it, because it won't be seen in a good light if you're seen as someone trying to get just simply more money.
Can I just follow up with a question, please, Nina? There was a question about whether that needs to be included as part of the overall budget or as a separate line. So please expand on that, please.
Yes. So as you might remember from my presentation, there are two ways you will need to present your budget. One is by category, by cost category, and the additional funding will need to be compounded within the base amount, with the base amount under the relative cost category. Okay, so if you're asking for 500K in personnel and 500K for personnel and additional funding, it will become 1 million, let's say, and the relative cost category personnel. When you present your budget instead under the 6 different boxes, there is a dedicated, is the 5th box, in which you need to spell out how much of that budget will be additional, on top of the base amount. So essentially, to repeat, so in the budget category, it will need to be compounded with the base amount. In the narrative part, you will have a dedicated box where you request additional funding, and you need to explain how much you need for that.
Thank you, Nino. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Adam. I don't know if your project included additional funding.
Mine did not. So
okay.
I'll refrain from running my mouth on that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Many thanks, Raquel and Nino. I think I'll move very quickly to some very important questions that will probably be relevant for everyone over here from the finance bit. So on the website, it says that 2.5 million euros is pro rata, but it wasn't specific. Does that mean that if I only have 4 years for my project, that the limit will be 2 million euros? And also overheads, should overheads be included in the 2.5 million and the 2 million additional funding budgets as well?
Okay. So the 2.5 million is the overall financial envelope. So that includes overheads, okay? Includes the 25%. The pro rata, yes. I haven't done the math, but I think for years over 5, we probably produce 2 million instead of 2.5. So the answer is yes. It will be pro rata on the However, it would be pro rata only on the base amounts. If you request additional funding, that is not subject to pro rata. So if you request $1 million, if you're based in the EU member states or the country, even if your project is less than 5 years, and if you persuade the reviewers you need additional funding, it won't be subject to pro rata. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Nina. And just to clarify then that the additional 2 million or 1 million funding pot also includes overheads. So I provided
it does.
an answer.
That's right. Yeah.
To this question online. Okay. Raquel, do we want to move to team members? There were quite a few questions about this as well.
Yeah, there were loads of questions about team members and what's the typical size of an ERC grant, how many team members you can include, where they can be based, how they can be costed into the application as well. So if you can perhaps explain on that or go through that, in more detail, please.
Yeah, and then perhaps we can ask Adam at the end how many team members you got in your team. But yes, you can ask for as many team members as necessary to implement your project. That's the short answer, really. There is not a magic number. There is not a maximum number. Technically, you can have 0 if your project doesn't require the input of any other individuals. They can be based and remain based wherever they are in the world. They don't have to be affiliated to the same host institution of the principal investigator. You cost them according to the salary band of the host institution where they are embedded on average, in terms of salary band. Was there another question there, Raquel, that I missed? So how many? Pardon?
How many? And also there was a question about whether they need to submit a letter of support from those organizations.
Very important question that they don't, but as the PI, you are liable to disclose to evidence at any point during the project implementation that you had the consent of the PI in a written form. So you can keep that in your drawer so long as you got an email, even a simple email would do, that you have the consent of the team member at the time of the application, by the time of the PI, by deadline that they have agreed to be included in your project. So no formal document to be uploaded other than the letter of support from the host institution of the PI. Adam, how many team members did you have?
Right, so 4 team members is the plan, although because I have different work packages with different substantive aims on different work packages, not hiring them all at once, so sort of phasing some of them out. Some of them will be longer, and some of them are hired a little bit later in the project. And one thing I've also done, which is really useful, is you can also choose later to change, if it makes sense to do so, how you structured some of those hires. So for example, if you initially built into the proposal that you're going to do a 4-year postdoc on this topic, if as you begin to work on it, you realize that 2 2-year postdocs that are substantively slightly different would make more sense given the scientific aims, you can make those changes later. But initially, given the money, right, given the amount, you're going to have a larger team than you would if you were doing an ERC starting grant, for instance, because you'll have basically capacity for more postdocs for more years. In my case, 4 is what I initially pitched in the project for several years each.
And as you pointed out, Adam, earlier on, being in a lump sum funding model, it gives you the freedom as well to expand if you need along the line on your team members. And also I failed to mention that team members can be of any level of seniority. So in theory, you can have team members who are even more senior of the PI, so long as you can evidence that the PI remains the sole leader in the project. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. And I'd like to thank once again Professor Adam Carter. It's been truly inspirational to have you on the webinar today. Thank you very much for your time. And also a great thank you to my colleagues who very kindly supported Bourget, Raquel, and Nikki in the background. And all of you for your attention. As mentioned, the recording will be available on the UKRI YouTube channel, but also in the ACRO portal together with the PDF version of the slides. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you for your attention. Bye.
Thanks all.